Please give me a moment. Let me just, yeah. Okay. So good evening, everybody. My name is Pritika, and I'll just begin directly. So the G20 summit was held in Bali, Indonesia in 2022, I'm sorry. Uh, the G20 summit, prior to that, we had two summits, namely T20 and B20, which are the think tanks of the organization of the forum, Intergovernmental Forum, which had discussions on education. So, what is G20? G20 is an intergovernmental forum where developmental plans, social issues, economic issues regarding sustainable development goals is discussed between 19 countries and the European Union. If we look at the list of the countries that are involved in the G20 forum, then most countries have education free or subsidized. Example, India. We have subsidized education, we have government schools. Then Canada, which also has public schools, which has subsidized education up to primary level and high school, and for college also. This year, the theme of the G20 summit was Recover Together, Recover Stronger. It was about recovering from the COVID-19 shocks, especially in terms of education. We had faced a large amount of disturbances. So many people, so many students had to drop out because they did not have access to digital devices. So, the importance of digital transformation and digital literacy among women, children, and vulnerable sections was paid during this G20 summit. The pandemic's challenge on education was majorly about loss of accessibility to education itself. People lost their work, but students, they suffered drastically. They lost access to education, their basic education, and some also had to start working at a tender age to support their families. I would like to present a data. Can I present a data? I have a very interesting data to present. Can I please do that?
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. It says that host has disabled participant screen sharing. I think I need to.
Like you can just read it out. It will be
Okay.
difficult.
All right. Okay. So I have two data. One was published by the Hindustan Times. It was a 16th edition of the ASER survey, which captured the transition in the education system after the pandemic. So basically, in 2018, the enrollment ratio in government schools was 64.3%. In 2020, it increased to 65.8%. 6%, it was 70.3%. While the enrollment ratio in the private schools, it declined. It declined up to 4% from 2020 to 21. And the students who did not enroll, their statistic remained completely static. So basically, people took interest in education. They paid importance to education. The ratio between dropping out and enrollment ratio was, it was quite, the difference was too much. So the best part was that the government school, the enrollment ratio in the government school, it increased drastically between all these countries. So the theme for G20 summit in 2023 is One Earth, One Family, and One Future. If I were to decipher the title, then it means that holistic growth of all nations, and in a holistic way as well. We have one Earth, all the country, although we are divided as countries, but the Earth is us, the Earth is all of us. So we have one family, we have one Earth, and we have one future, we have one goal. We need to save the Earth, we need to develop, we need to improve. as social beings, as economic, as from the aspects of economics, and from so many aspects we need to develop, we need to plan out sustainable developmental goals. So that is the theme for the G20 summit in 2023. Coming back to education, the 2023 G20 and we are all aware of the national educational policy that is about to be laid out. So it makes the perfect combination for discussion of education in India. But so many radical changes have been made in the NEP, like introduction of new courses regarding heritage, regarding history, regarding culture of India. Then there are changes in research and development. More importance has been paid to the research and developmental part. And there's also inculcation of vocational education. So the pandemic taught us the importance of digital transformation, the importance of digital literacy. So how can we achieve that in the future? In my view, we can achieve this goal through an economic path. We can raise the per capita income. Surely there will be inflation in the long term, but it can be cured by other economic tools such as lowering the bank rates. But if we raise the per capita income, the purchasing power increases. And hence, as we have seen the data earlier, people are paying importance to education. They will surely pay importance to digitalize the education, to involve digital literacy. If the government schools, if the enrollment rates are high, so high, it is 70.3% in 2021, then I think we can start the change from there. We can encourage the students to pay importance to digital literacy, to digital education. Surely, I'm so sorry, there was a voice. Yeah. So surely there will be inflation, but it can be cured later. But in the long run, the digital literacy, it will it will pave a wonderful path for the education of our country. So here we pay importance to equality over efficiency, right? Because if we increase the per capita income, we pay more importance to equality. But it is very essential in the current scenario to pay importance to education, to digital literacy, although it can lead to economic consequences. But it allows people to inculcate the requirement of technology in education, and induce them to have at least one digital device so that they can support their children's education. Meanwhile, the government schools can provide the teachers with digital devices. They can put up digital devices in the schools through projectors, digital boards, etc. Now, to conclude, since the need for digital literacy has increased, it is imperative for all of us to play a role. It is important to impart digital knowledge to elders, to children, and this is how we can give back. The countries of G20, such as South Korea and Germany, are way ahead of us with technology. I hope all of them collaborate and initiate research and developmental programs for the education sector, especially for the public sector at least, such as making low priced devices by eliminating all other extra features and making them education oriented. Since the enrollment ratio in government schools have been increasing, we can hope to see changes in government schools, in the public schools. I hope to see large scale developments. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Pritika. Like I mentioned at the start of the meeting, if anybody else is ready, please raise your hand or drop your name in the chat box. Please go ahead, Prerna.
Before that, sorry, Oindrila, please, can you switch off your audio, please? Indrila? Yeah, thank you. Go ahead. Go ahead, Prerna.
Yeah. Kritika covered a lot about the history and introduction of the G20, so I'll not go into that. What I did find very interesting is that education as a formal working group of G20 only started in 2018, which, if you think about it, considering that we have been talking about Sustainable Development Goal 4 for since forever, it is quite recent, very, very recent, in fact. And I think that is also reflecting in the fact that international cooperation in education is largely focused on higher education in terms of foreign exchange programs or even collaborations with foreign universities and all. And even in foreign education, UGC does not allow digital education from foreign universities as a collaborated part of a degree program in India. So, considering that COVID-19 has emphasized so much that digital literacy and digital ecosystem is going to become a very, very important part of all educational levels, I think we should focus also on where we are going in this direction in terms of international cooperation, not just having it focused on the higher education levels, but also bringing it down to the school levels, because best practices from all around the world can actually help us. Uh, we can learn from their trajectories about what we can implement in India at the grassroots levels. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of countries launched quite similar programs to India for digital content delivery. Now, if we had an overarching international cooperative framework, this content would be repurposed on a very wide global scale, which would then cut down on costs. It would cut down on a lot of time, because content development, curriculum development, generating technological infrastructure, all of that takes a lot of time. So if we build a framework around digital content and digital curriculums in the international scale, a lot of this research and a lot of this development work that is already happening can be repurposed for a very, very large majority of people, because ultimately the skills in a globalized world that we live in, the skills are common. You need foundational literacy, you need foundational numeracy, you need language skills, you need computer skills. All of those skills are common, all of those skills are being taught all across the world. So I think going forward, we need to focus more on a globalized education system as well. Some of it is happening in the sense that you have IB schools and you have Cambridge schools and all of those things, but those are not accessible to the grassroots levels. Those are not accessible to the rural students. Those are for a very niche, very upper middle class and beyond level of economic strata that is accessing those kind of opportunities. So, in terms of, I think, when we talk about G20 and education, we know that in their own respects, each country is evolving policies that take into account its demographics and its goals with respect to education and skill development. But I think we also have the leverage now to take advantage of these platforms on a larger scale, not just in terms of uh, developing policies, but also in terms of the results that these policies give. Because I think if we only focus on collaborating for policy development, then we are missing out on a very, very large section of opportunity that these globalized platforms actually offer us. On another level, I think it is also important to notice that uh, digital infrastructure, while it is being developed, is not going to be accessible until and unless there is income security. Because the issue is not that there are no people there. See, for example, for Digital India, we already have centers in every rural block and every rural area that are offering Digital India services to those sectors, those specific gram panchayats or village level sectors, right? So if we leverage that, we already have people who can impart those skills. Problem is that when a pandemic like situation occurs, then parents think that the opportunity cost of sending their child to school or sparing them from work is higher than the benefit that they would get from the child studying. They think that if he or she misses out on school for 2 to 3 years, it is not going to make a very much of a difference in their income trajectory or their career growth or anything, because they're not thinking from a career perspective. They're not thinking that if my child misses out on school for 3 years, his or her final school exam is delayed for 3 years, then they'll be earning later, because their earning sources are limited to their local economies only. They're thinking in terms of, okay, maybe they'll set up a shop, maybe they'll become a mechanic, they'll become a technician, or they'll work in the fields as an agriculture laborer or something. They're not thinking in terms of anything larger than that. They're not thinking in terms of very, very ambitious goals. From an urban middle class background or an urban rich background, we would think of these things very differently. When we say, oh, but your child is not going to school for 3 years, we are not able to connect with them because we are not talking about their aspirations. So until and unless we can show them how their aspirations are getting affected by the deprivation of these schooling years, they will not want to, uh, they will not see why they should not be compromising on that. So alongside the development of infrastructure and content and curriculum, it is very important to uh, make education relevant for them in their own microcosms, rather than only thinking about it in terms of employability in the industrial sector or industry 4.0 and upskilling and all of that, because those are very distant dreams for them. How it is relevant to their reality is what I think will drive change on a larger scale. So that's my contribution.
Thanks a lot, Prerna. I think you have given us a very in-depth look into why exactly, as you mentioned, income stability is important. I think that was elaborated a lot on what Pritika mentioned earlier about raising the per capita income overall. Um, of course, anybody who'd like to go next, please raise your hand. Anyone?
Anushka, you want to go next?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. I would like to begin by discussing what the G20 is, giving a brief introduction to it. It was conceived as an international mechanism for governance of the global economy. The G20 includes all the major economies which have evolved over time into one of the most powerful economic and financial groupings. At present, it comprises 85% of the global GDP, 75% of the international trade, and two-thirds of the global population. It represents the world's key body for handling global economic and development issues. Held under a rotational presidency on an annual basis since 2011, the G20's initial focus was on a broad macroeconomic policy, formerly known as the Summit on Financial Markets and the World Economy. The G20 has made continuous efforts until the pandemic towards achieving robust global economic growth. It redoubled its efforts after the pandemic. More recently, the G20 focus shifted to include a wide range of global issues, including climate change and energy, health, counterterrorism, and migration. So, on December 1st, 2020, India assumed the G20 presidency from Indonesia and will convene the G20 Leaders Summit for the first time in the country in 2023. A nation which is deeply committed to democracy and multilateralism, India's G20 presidency would be a historic moment as it seeks to play an important role by finding pragmatic global solutions for the well-being of all, and in doing so manifest the true spirit of the world is one family. At the closing session of the last summit held in Indonesia, our Honorable Prime Minister told G20 leaders that India's presidency will be inclusive, ambitious, decisive, and action-oriented. He underlined environment, women-led development, peace and security, economic growth, technological innovation as priorities, which are embodied in the theme of India's G20 chairmanship, One Earth, One Family, One Future. Earlier, Our Prime Minister also said on November 15th that the COVID pandemic, climate change, and Ukraine conflict have together caused havoc in the world, leaving supply chains in ruins and triggering a crisis of essentials, adding that the poor face a more severe challenge. He has called for a new world order for a post COVID reform. So, today I would like to use this opportunity to delve into a key aspect of creating a new world, which is education, and discuss upon the impact the G20 can have on its inclusivity and digital transformation. Education is a basic human right and foundation, and it is the foundation to build on inclusivity, gender equality, and sustainable development. The education sector is the backbone of other sustainable development goals as well. Unfortunately, during the pandemic, the education sector suffered the most, hitting vulnerable sections of the society, especially girls. Fortunately, with more than half of its population using the internet, India has been pivoting the digital wave, which it can share and help other developing nations transform their education sector. However, we have witnessed the horrors of the COVID pandemic and the drastic impact it has had on the education sector throughout the world. Without coordinated global action to prevent, mitigate, and respond to the effects of the pandemic, the consequences for children now and for the future of our shared humanity will be severe. During its G20 presidency, India can focus on multiple themes within Sustainable Development Goals, such as inclusive, equitable, and sustainable growth, women's empowerment, digital public infrastructure, and tech-enabled development in areas ranging from health, agriculture, education, e-commerce, skill mapping, culture, tourism, climate financing, ESG, circular economy, global food and energy security, and multilateral reforms. Building on skilled workforce can be the common interlink between all these global issues and employment. So some measures which India must try to include in the G20 summit are ensuring that all children learn by closing the digital divide. At the peak of the pandemic, nationwide school closures disrupted the learning of students worldwide. Marginal children suffered the heaviest burden. Many people were not able to access remote learning during school shutdowns. Moreover, previous shutdowns demonstrate that children who are out of school for extended periods, especially girls, are less likely to return. All measures must be taken to ensure that in future, due to calamities or pandemics, schools should not be closed for prolonged periods of time. Secondly, there needs to be an increased education funding and ensure equal access to quality, violence-free education so every child learns. This will require focus on the most marginalized children, including girls, children under attack and on the move, children with disabilities, and children living in rural communities or without access to the internet. Closing the digital divide by connecting all children and young people to the internet by 2030 and providing young people with safe, quality, accessible, and equitable online learning is extremely essential. Next, there needs to be an emphasis on healthcare. We need to ensure the continuity of key health and nutrition services for children and young people, especially routine immunization and prioritizing the hardest to reach. Countries need to unite to fight the spread of misinformation and build back confidence in routine immunization. Countries also need to collect gender, age, and disability disaggregated data on children and young people, including for those who have contracted COVID-19, and invest in research to better understand its impact on their health and well-being. It needs to be ensured that every child and young person has equal and affordable access, regardless of where they live, to COVID-19 diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines as a part of a very comprehensive package of essential care. And it needs to be ensured that any new funding expands access to other essential health services for children and young people, including by training and supporting healthcare workers. Then there needs to be a support and protection of mental health of children and young people, and there needs to be an end to abuse, gender-based violence, and neglect in childhood. The COVID-19 crisis has only exacerbated violence, exploitation, and abuse as children are cut off from key support services while simultaneously suffering the additional stress placed on families in turmoil. Girls are particularly vulnerable with child marriage and adolescent pregnancy. There needs to be an integration of sustainable child mental health and psychosocial support funding in all global humanitarian responses, and commit to increase multi-year funding to better meet the protection needs of children in crisis. Uh, Prioritization needs to happen to prevent and respond to gender-based violence in global humanitarian action, increase in funding for gender-specific interventions. Finally, there also needs to be an increased access to clean water, sanitation, and hygiene, and address environmental degradation and climate change. There needs to be an investment in climate resilient water, sanitation, and hygiene services in homes, schools, hospitals, and public spaces to make communities better prepared for future pandemics and other shocks. There needs We need to continue to pursue, implement, and monitor climate and environmentally focused targets outlined in the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement. Children and young people need to be taught about climate change, the environment, and responsible and sustainable consumption and production.
Anushka, thanks a lot for your thoughts. I think for now, let's move on to our next speaker. I don't think it was mentioned at the start, but I think I mentioned now. We are trying to keep the whole discussion limited, and we want to get till 8 or 8:10, and we want to give everybody a chance to speak. So I would like to request everybody to limit their time to 5 minutes at most, so that all of us get the opportunity to express our views. Thanks a lot, Anushka. Sorry for
thank you.
interrupting you.
Thank you. No problem.
Great points.
Megha.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My internet connection is very unstable, so I'll try to speak. Please let me know whenever I'm not audible.
Megha, if it's too much of a problem, you can turn off your camera, and we'll just hear you out.
Okay, should I stop my video?
Yeah, that's not a problem.
Am I audible now?
Yeah.
The G20 formed in 1999, an informal gathering of many of the world's largest economies, is the premier global forum for discussing economic issues, climate change issues, and sustainable development issues. Its major members include USA, EU, UK, Russia, France, China, and India, among many others. The first summit was held in 2008. So when we're talking about public education, let's take a closer look at the public education system in some of the G20 countries. So first, when I start with
Okay, I think Megha's internet might have dropped out completely. So for now, let's move on to somebody else.
no, I'm there.
Okay. Hi. Okay. Hi.
Actually, I saw that message that speaking in a closed video is not allowed, so I stopped.
Oh, no, sir, there's just a small issue where her internet is not working out great. That is why she has her camera off for now.
So let's look at some of the countries' public education system. So first, let's start with the economic giant USA. So when we talk about USA's public education system, we can see that education is free for every student in the USA, regardless of their socio-economic status, and there are variety of courses. And there is a pigeonhole like system that if you have chosen one course in one class, you have to like continue into that or only, even if you're not interested. So there is like variety of courses and there's flexibility of choosing courses. Also, there are courses societal issues like alcohol and drug abuse, which is a major issue in USA nowadays. If we talk about South Korea spends 8% of its GDP on education, which is quite high as compared to other countries or the average. And teachers have to be highly qualified there to be like appointed as public officially qualified teachers. Unlike India, where we see that there's a lot of corruption in appointment, and whenever teachers are selected, also they do not pay much attention, especially in the public schools. Also, in South Korea, we see teaching is a very respected profession, unlike in India, which is like considered that when we are not able to do anything, then we go for teaching. If you talk about in Japan, a major G20 country, there's mostly education based. Education is mostly based on technology, and if we see, like we see that there's so much emphasis on moral education, also mannerism, also they teach students hygiene, also. So basically, the whole education system in Japan is like holistic development of the student, not only on memorizing the facts or giving exams and then excelling in it and then becoming something. And if we talk about our own country, India, we see that 50% of school education is provided by way of government schooling. But we see that there is so limited or poor learning outcomes. In India, public schools usually suffer from non-availability of teachers, and existing teachers they spend their most time on non-academic and administrative activities. So basically, we're seeing that in India, the most of the education, if we are saying 50% of the education is provided by way of government schooling, but the public infrastructure and the teachers, they are not like competent or very much capable to provide education to the students. And in India, if you see, public education is only availed by the very poor socioeconomic status, because in India it is believed that if your economic status is good, then you should go for private schooling, because public education is not very efficient in India. So even if the poor strata people, if they have like if they earn income, like if they increase their income by any way, they want their children to go to private schools. And we see that when we there was this program for international student assessment PISA exam, which was like conducted by OECD to assess the learning outcomes across the countries. We see that India opted out of it because it was fearful, because we see that the learning outcomes in India for the students is very, very low. And if we see it in 2009, India fared only above Kyrgyzstan in the PISA test, which which is a study done to produce comparable data on education policy and outcomes of 15-year-olds across the countries. Now, if we talk about, as the question suggested, to like look after the pandemic, what were the interventions done by the government to ensure that ensure that there is inclusion of every student in the education sector? We see that a lot of digital were like introduced. E-Vidya, which is part of Atmanirbhar Bharat, it was introduced to provide digital content to the students during the pandemic time when all the schooling was like completely abrupted or stopped. Then we see Diksha. It was called One Nation, One Digital Platform. It was a kind of digital infrastructure for providing quality e-content for school education. And if you see, Swam Prabha TV was also launched, one class, one channel from class 1 to 12. Also, there was special e-content launched for visually and hearing impaired students. Then, not only regarding education, but government also launched Mano Darpan, which is a kind of initiative which talked about a wide range of activities to provide psychosocial support to students and teachers, and also parents like who were affected, like severely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. All these like schemes I have taken from pib.gov.in. And if we talk about the intervention of technology in education, we see that the concept of smart classrooms, if we see, so whenever education like was provided, whatever education could be provided in the COVID-19 time, it was basically through video conferencing or due to these live stream channel or classes wherever it was possible. Also, we are using the technology of augmented reality. Many schools are using uh, 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 artificial intelligence. So we see that most of technology is like borrowed or like it came from the other countries. It was not initially present in India. India like adopted all this technology from other countries. So we see, like, as a conclusion, I would like to say that in India, public education satisfies the requirement of many of the students, especially coming from the underprivileged and poor economic socioeconomic status. So merely launching the schemes would not do enough good for the students. So like the government should focus on proper implementation of these schemes. And we also have to know that we are providing this digital e-content, but we have to also know that what is the level of digital inclusion in the country, because most of the people who are having access to digital devices, they are not not completely from the underprivileged background. They mostly come from the higher status and the high economic classes. So before providing all this technology-based education, we have to know the inclusion of the country. We have to also understand that what's the digital inclusion of the females in the country, because whenever if somebody buys mobile in the family, it is first bought by the male member only. It is not for the female member. And also we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic time that uh, even if the parents had to decide which child to send for education, like whatever, like if they had some resource left during that time, they preferred their male child to go for education, and they kept their female child at home, see, like not to go to school. So like the thing is that we have to understand these gender issues also in education perspective, because India is not all white and black. It has to be studied in gray area, not only merely launching of schemes, not only merely focusing on education as something in center. We cannot do enough good for the students of the country. We have to understand other issues which are aligned to education and which affect the Indian society as a whole in general. Thank you.
Thanks
Yeah,
a lot, Megha.
yeah,
Go ahead.
thank you, Megha. That was like very informative, and thank you for comparing India's status with the other G20 countries. From that information, we can understand that where India is standing compared to the other G20 countries, and also like as you have mentioned about the issues which are very which are pertaining to at a microeconomic level, right? So yeah, but one suggestion that I would want to give, that in your speech, like whatever you have said, you have pointed out the main issue, the rural issues, and where there is the loophole in the government part, or the loophole from the side of the citizens or the parents, but while discussing these things, I prefer it to be very like education is something which is like huge. You cannot uh, point out everything all at once. It's an umbrella topic. So while you are discussing about, maybe say for example, dropout rate, or maybe like family lack of family motivation, okay, and the gender inequality, you cannot just directly jump to again the public health and the mental health, which is fine, like, but then try to focus more on what you are saying, like as if it's the dropout rate or the enrollment rate, try to emphasize it with facts, and what the government have done, what the government can do, and what are the inspiration that India can take from other G20 countries. Like now I can say that America is the world's it has the world's largest GDP, okay, the richest of all the countries. So of course taking aspirations is fine, but we cannot take their policies and implement in our country because of differences, our culture, the dynamics, and the most important thing is that our population. So if you could compare it with China, maybe, right, because we have almost, like, we are parallelly running in terms of population growth. So maybe you could have done more research about regarding China, like what are the policies there in the China, and what India can take it out from there, irrespective of the fact, it is like keeping aside the border dispute that is happening, okay. And another thing is that okay, regarding Pritika, you have mentioned about recession is curable, which I don't like. That is not the correct word, that is not the correct phrase to say that recession is curable. Recession is inevitable. It will come after every 8 to 10 years, and in order to make education inclusive, also you cannot say that the per capita income should be increased, right? And then recession will come and it will be curable. No, it is not a disease, number one. So yeah, regarding that, of course, the thing that you have mentioned, the possible recommendations that you have put forward, those were fine. But then again, regarding the recession and per capita income, that was kind of like you could have framed it, in some other words, maybe. Yeah. Krish, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for giving feedback to everyone who spoke, Tanya. I think it will be helpful, especially, weekly discussion. Keep it in mind for the next time we come here to talk. Anyone else? Guys, please, we just want your thoughts. I'm sure all of you have prepared something. There's no harm in volunteering. We shouldn't have to call up people one by one, right? So if you prepared something, anything, just raise your hand and we'll start off. Anyone? I think we'll just continue on picking people then. Jairaj, do you mind giving us your thoughts?
Sure. So a lot of the research work that I've been actually focusing on actually ended up being at the UGC level, at the higher level of education, and there's a lot to be done in terms of that, in terms of higher education in India, because I think everyone here is aware of the fact that we are moving towards a less agrarian, more service-based economy. That is a trend that we are seeing all over the globe, and there is a lot to be done with that, especially at this level. I was actually reading this very interesting research paper. Let me just pull it out. Um, yeah, it is the Economics of Internationalization of Higher Education in the Post-Pandemic Era by M. Saravanan. It's very easy to find. And it's very interesting how he talks about the manner through which internationalization can be integrated into the process of education, and what the benefits of it are in terms of not only exchanging information technology, but also exchanging aspects of diplomacy, building better relations, and making our students more global. Um, and then that led me down a very interesting rabbit hole of figuring out how SWAYAM operates in India. If anyone has seen the SWAYAM program, it's a very interesting MOOC-based platform that is now run by the Ministry of Education. And going through those courses, I realized that there is so much that can be done from that kind of a digital platform if we are able to provide that sort of accessibility to the local communities. Because whenever we talk about education in the pandemic, a lot of the higher middle class and upper middle class students were able to continue their education because of their accessibility to these technological tools. But if these tools can be made available to a more rural population, I feel like there is a lot of potential to provide education through these MOOC courses. Because again, the SWAYAM courses, the credits of SWAYAM courses do apply. And then we can bring in the aspect of internationalization, because there are several universities across the globe that do provide MOOC courses on other websites such as Coursera. So I feel like there is a relationship to build on that aspects and in terms of internationalization of that sort. And of course, as someone mentioned previously, all of this needs to be brought down to not only just the higher education, but on to senior and secondary levels of education, and to those and make India a more global nation. And I think that ties in incredibly well with the slogan of the G20 this time around, with One Earth, One Family, and One Future. I feel like there is a lot to be done through these technological tools that we have access to at this point to make them better. And I kept it short because due to lack of time and everything, but that's all I have.
Thanks a lot. I think you mentioning SWAYAM courses is actually a very important point. SWAYAM not only offers higher education courses, but it also offers courses for 11th and 12th students that go along with how their syllabus is taught. So it is really a very good initiative taken by the government, and if it can be given access to more people, maybe like you said, with collaboration to larger foreign universities, would be a great step forward for all of us, for the education system as a whole. Um, Anybody else ready to volunteer, or are we going to pick up someone else again? randomly. Sure, Vamsi, do you mind?
Vamsi is like he joined today only, so he
Okay.
didn't know about the topic. I think Windrila wants to add something.
Sure, hi. Okay, so not very, not very comfortable speaking, but anyway, let's give it a try. I've never, I actually have a little stage fright, but anyway, I'll give it a try. Okay, so I'm starting off. We all know about the G20 summit. The G20 or a group of 20. It is an intergovernmental portal which comprises of 19 countries like India, China, there's Japan, there's Brazil, and a few more, and the European Union. So it basically works on global economic issues like financial stability, like climate change mitigation, education, sustainable development, and these are, I think, very important issues when talking about the development of any country or the world, as we can say on a bigger picture. So this G20 countries, they together comprise of more than two-thirds of the global population, and hence the it holds a huge COVID-19 was there, and it was a big crisis, and it affected formal education across the world. So, in if we talk about only the G20 countries, it I think affected from I don't remember the exact data. It affected more than 70% of learners, and overall, it was 1.5 billion affected learners, constituting or it constituted of more than 90% of the total enrollment across the world. So this happened mostly because the G20 countries comprise of certain countries which are not as developed as the others, like the US, the UK. These are the countries that they are much more technologically advanced, but countries like India, specifically, I would like to say they are not so much. So most of the students did not have the access to digital form of education, did not have access to internet, and this created a huge number of dropouts we saw. And this not only created dropouts, it also created what should I say? It was it was a very big uh, it was a very big setback in terms of education for even the ongoing learners. So this created a very alarming situation in terms of the quality and quantity of literacy rates and the future of the countries. So the G20 summit, which is hosted by India this year, they have they have come up with to work on certain aspects which I think which is important not only for the G20 countries but the entire world. So few of the aspects that they are working on this year is number one, the continuation of learning within and beyond the uh, coverage of the G20 area only. It ensures that the students are getting that resources that they need to continue their learning. Also, they're working so that it is working on it's working on a action policy, we can say. Action policy would be a right word. Action policy which can ensure that every problem that they encounter, the students, if education goes online again or it is shifted to the online mode, can be encountered. And the education should be smooth. Education should be something that everyone has access to. So these are the things that the G20 summit will work on in terms of education, and there are other things as well. And we know that the G20 partnership, it's very important. It has gained the field of education as we know today. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thanks a lot for your thoughts. I think mentioning that sheer extent of how many students were affected by the pandemic really helps someone quantify why it is so important to make sure that if it ever happens again, we know how to tackle it. Is there anybody else left who's not spoken up yet? Okay, I'll assume then that everybody who's